Second Youth, Eleanor's story. Morning light filtered through the blinds, creating intricate patterns of shadows and light on the living room walls. Eleanor Greenwood sat in her favorite armchair, holding a cup of lukewarm tea. Today was the day, her 60th birthday. A date she had once imagined as distant and abstract was now reality. On the coffee table lay an envelope with a law firm's logo. Eleanor had been staring at it for about an hour, unable to bring herself to open it. It was the last letter from Robert, her husband, who had passed away 6 months ago after 32 years of marriage. In his will, he had specified that this letter should be delivered to her on her 60th birthday. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Inheritance. Dear Ellie, the letter began in handwriting she could recognize even with her eyes closed. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't share this special day with you. I'm sorry for that. But I want you to know, our story doesn't end here. Robert had always been the dreamer, the romantic, while Eleanor remained the pragmatic one in their relationship. She had been an English literature teacher at a high school, and he was a journalist who spent most of their married life traveling, covering events around the world. Remember our conversation about what we would do when we retired? You always said you wanted to see the places I described in my stories. I regret that I couldn't show them to you myself, but I've left you something more than memories. Eleanor turned the page and a bank statement fell out. The amount listed made her heart skip a beat. This was money she never knew existed. Enough to fulfill all those dreams she and Robert had once talked about. I always knew you were stronger than me, Ellie. You were my anchor, my compass. Now it's time for you to embark on your own journey. I'm leaving you not just money, but a map, a list of places you should visit. These are places that changed me, and I believe they will change you too. This isn't goodbye, my love. It's an invitation to begin a new chapter. In the envelope was another sheet, a list of 12 places around the world with brief notes written in Robert's hand. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, feeling tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in these 6 months, she felt something besides emptiness, a strange trembling feeling, a mixture of grief and, unexpectedly, anticipation. Chapter 2. The First Step. Sarah, Eleanor's daughter, couldn't hide her concern when her mother told her about her decision. Mom, are you sure? Traveling alone at your age? Maybe I could go with you, at least for the first trip? Eleanor shook her head. Honey, you have your own life, your children, your job. And this is something I need to do by myself. The first destination on Robert's list was a small coastal town in Portugal, Nazaré. Here is where I first understood what it means to meet a force greater than yourself, his note read. Packing only the essentials, Eleanor headed to the airport. It was her first solo international flight. The school where she had taught for 35 years gave her a touching send-off. We always knew you were an adventurer at heart, Mrs. Greenwood, the principal said, handing her a small travel journal. Nazaré greeted Eleanor with the sound of waves and the smell of salt. The town was nestled between cliffs and ocean, and it was here that some of the world's tallest waves attracted surfers from around the globe. In a small inn overlooking the ocean, Eleanor found an envelope addressed to her. Inside was an old photograph of Robert standing on the beach with a massive wave in the background and a short note. Watch how the world unfolds before you, Ellie. That evening, she sat on the inn's terrace, watching the sunset over the Atlantic Ocean. At the next table was a couple about her age, John and Martha from Canada, as she later discovered. They had been traveling for over 10 years, ever since they retired. You know what's most amazing about traveling at our age? Martha asked when they got to talking. You realize it's never too late to be amazed by the world. Each new place is an opportunity to feel young again. The next day, standing on the cliff and watching Nazaré's giant waves, Eleanor felt, for the first time in a long while, a sense of awe at nature's grandeur. She understood what Robert meant. Here, in the face of this untamed force, her own fears seemed insignificant. Chapter 3. Unexpected discoveries. The second destination on Robert's list was Kyoto, Japan. Here is where I learned to value the silence between words, and he wrote, Japan welcomed Eleanor with blooming cherry blossoms and a culture so different from everything she knew that the first few days felt like a dream. In a small ryokan, a traditional Japanese inn, the proprietor, an elderly woman named Akiko, greeted her with such warmth as if they were old friends. Robert-san spoke of you, Akiko said in surprisingly good English. He stayed here many times. It turned out that Robert had repeatedly returned to Kyoto during his assignments in Asia. He had befriended Akiko's family and even helped her son get a scholarship to study at an American university. He talked about you a lot, Akiko continued, pouring tea during the ceremony she was conducting for Eleanor. About your strength, your wisdom. He said you were his North Star. These words made Eleanor see her marriage in a new light. She had always thought that Robert, with his passion for adventure, was the one leading their family forward. But now she was beginning to understand that their relationship was more complex and complementary than she had realized. In Kyoto, Eleanor spent 2 weeks learning the art of ikebana, meditating in temples, and spending long hours in conversations with Akiko. They talked about life, loss, and finding beauty in imperfection. The principle of wabi-sabi that is so deeply rooted in Japanese culture. In your country, people fear aging, Akiko remarked one day. Here we see dignity in it. The wrinkles on your face are the map of your life, the story you've lived. These words made Eleanor reflect on how she had perceived her age. All her life, she had tried to conform to American beauty ideals, fighting the signs of aging. But here in Kyoto, she began to see her 60 years not as an end to something, but as the beginning of a new chapter, full of wisdom and depth. Chapter 4. An Unexpected Friendship. When the third destination on Robert's list was Buenos Aires, here is where I learned to feel the rhythm of life again, his note read. The Argentine capital pulsed with an energy that initially overwhelmed Eleanor. After the calm and contemplation of Kyoto, the noisy streets filled with people dancing tango right in the open air seemed like another universe. In a small hotel in the San Telmo district, Eleanor found another envelope from Robert. Let the city sweep you into its dance, Ellie, he wrote. That same evening, she ventured to visit a milonga, a traditional dance hall where tango was danced. Sitting at a table and watching the couples on the dance floor, Eleanor felt invisible, until a woman about her age with bright lipstick and sparkling eyes sat down next to her. First time at a milonga? She asked in English with a strong Spanish accent. My name is Carmen. Thus began an unexpected friendship between the American teacher and the Argentine widow. Carmen, as it turned out, had been a professional tango dancer in her youth. Now she taught at a dance school for people of the third age, and as she put it, tango is not just movements, Carmen said as they sat in a small cafe after her lessons, which she had invited Eleanor to join. It's a conversation without words. It's trust. It's life. Eleanor, who had always considered herself clumsy at dancing, was surprised to discover that under Carmen's guidance, she began to feel the rhythm of tango. It's in your blood, Carmen laughed. You've just forgotten how to listen to the music inside you. During her 3 weeks in Buenos Aires, Eleanor not only learned the basics of tango, but also gained a true friend. They spent days exploring the city, talking about books. Carmen turned out to be an avid reader, sharing stories about their husbands, children, and grandchildren. You know what I realized after Antonio died? Carmen said one day as they sat by the waterfront, watching the sunset. That life goes on, and you can find joy even after the greatest loss. Not the same as before, but sometimes even deeper. These words touched something deep within Eleanor. She was beginning to understand that Robert had given her not just a journey, he had given her the opportunity to rediscover herself. Chapter 5. A Test of Courage. The fourth destination on Robert's list was Torres del Paine National Park in Chile. Here is where I understood how small and simultaneously strong we are, he wrote. After the bustle of Buenos Aires, the stark beauty of the Patagonian mountains seemed like another world. Eleanor joined a small tour group, most of whom were much younger than her. The guide, a young Chilean named Mateo, initially doubted her ability to handle the entire route. "Don't worry, we can adapt the path for you," he said with a patronizing smile that hurt Eleanor more than she expected. "I'll manage the standard route," she replied firmly. The first 2 days were tough. Muscles Eleanor had long forgotten about reminded her of their existence with every step. But she didn't give up, even when rain turned the trail into a slippery mess and the wind cut through to the bone. On the third day, their group was scheduled to climb to the famous towers that gave the park its name. The climb was steep and required good physical condition. Eleanor could feel the gazes of the other group members, a mixture of concern and skepticism. "You can stay at the base camp," Mateo suggested. "It's not shameful." But Eleanor knew she had to climb. Not for others, not even for Robert, but for herself. The ascent was excruciating. Several times she stopped to catch her breath, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. A young couple from the group, Jason and Lisa, stayed close to her, encouraging and helping in particularly difficult spots. When they finally reached the summit and the view of the granite towers rising to the sky against the backdrop of a turquoise glacial lake opened before them, Eleanor couldn't hold back tears. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "As is your courage," Mateo replied, offering her his water flask. There was no longer condescension in his eyes, only respect. That evening, as the group gathered around the campfire, Eleanor found that the young people were turning to her for advice and stories. She told them about her journey, about Robert and his letters, about how she was rediscovering the world and herself. "You remind me of my grandmother," said Lisa, who was sitting next to her. "She was just as strong. I hope to be like you when I reach your age." "The secret," Eleanor replied, looking at the stars that seemed incredibly close in the clear Patagonian sky, "is to never stop being amazed by the world and to never be afraid to do what seems impossible." Chapter 6. Returning to Roots. The subsequent months turned into a kaleidoscope of places and faces. Eleanor visited Marrakesh, where she learned to haggle in the bazaars and cook authentic tagine. In Nepal, she spent 2 weeks in a Buddhist monastery studying meditation. In New Zealand, she went skydiving, something she had never dreamed of, but which made her feel truly alive. Everywhere she found letters and clues from Robert, as if he were traveling with her. Sometimes they were just short notes, sometimes detailed stories about his own adventures in these places. With each new destination, she felt her confidence growing, the boundaries of her world expanding. The 11th destination on Robert's list was Paris. "Here is where I understood what it means to truly see beauty," he wrote. Eleanor stayed in a small apartment in the Marais district, which Robert, as it turned out, had bought many years ago. In the desk drawer, she found a whole collection of his notebooks, journals he had kept during his travels. Immersing herself in his words, she was discovering a new Robert, deeper, more sensitive than she had ever imagined. In one entry dated a year before his death, he wrote, "Ellie thinks I travel for adventure. The truth is, I travel to find ways to tell her about the beauty of the world. Every place I see through her eyes, imagining what words she would find to describe these sunsets, these mountains, these people. She was always the better storyteller of the two of us." These words shook Eleanor. All her life, she had thought she lived in the shadow of her bright, charismatic husband. Now she understood that for him, she had always been the star around which his universe revolved. In Paris, Eleanor began keeping her own journal. She recorded not just the events of her travels, but thoughts, feelings, observations. The words came easily, as if she had been waiting her whole life for the moment to release them. The 12th and final destination on Robert's list was their hometown, a small college town in New England. "Because sometimes you need to go far away to find your way home," he wrote. Returning almost a year after the beginning of her journey, Eleanor saw the familiar streets with new eyes. The house where they had spent most of their married life no longer seemed like a repository of memories. It had become a starting point for new beginnings. Chapter 7. A New Beginning. Sarah and her family met Eleanor at the airport. Her grandchildren, Jake and Emily, listened with delight to stories of their grandmother's adventures. "You've changed, Mom," Sarah said when they were alone. "You look younger." Eleanor smiled. "I'm not younger, dear. I'm just finally fully present in my life." In the last envelope, which she found in her study, was a short letter from Robert. "Dear Ellie, if you're reading this, it means you've completed your journey. But I hope this is just the beginning. The world is vast, and you've only started to explore it. I have one last gift for you, my publisher's contact. He's waiting for your manuscript. Your stories deserve to be heard." In the envelope was a business card from a well-known New York publishing house with a note that read, "Looking forward to your book, Mrs. Greenwood." 3 months later, Eleanor sat at her desk in her study, finishing the last chapter of her book, A Journey of a Lifetime, How I Learned to See the World at 60. Her travel journals and photographs had turned into a memoir that, as the editor said, captures the heart and inspires the soul. The book became an unexpected bestseller, especially among women over 50. Eleanor received letters from readers all over the world, thanking her for showing them that life after 60 could be the beginning of the most amazing adventure. But the main change occurred in Eleanor herself. Now when she looked in the mirror, she didn't just see an elderly woman. She saw a traveler, a writer, a tango dancer, a mountain climber. She saw a person who dared to start anew when most people think all the important things are behind them. 2 years after her first journey, Eleanor established a foundation that helped women over 50 fulfill their dreams of travel and education. She called it the Second Youth Foundation, in honor of a phrase Robert often repeated, "Youth is not a time of life, it's a state of mind." On her 65th birthday, Eleanor stood on the stage of the university auditorium where the presentation of her second book was taking place. The hall was full, mostly women her age, with a sparkle in their eyes and eagerness in their hearts. "Many people think that at our age, we should slow down, become quieter, take up less space in the world," she said, addressing the audience. "But I discovered something completely opposite. Now, when social expectations and obligations are behind us, the time comes to spread our wings, speak louder, demand more from life." She paused, looking at Robert's photograph, which she always placed on the table during her speeches. "My husband gave me a map, but I made the journey myself. And this journey taught me the most important thing. It's never too late to start a new chapter. Never too late to fall in love with life again. Second youth has nothing to do with trying to look 20 years younger. It's about feeling that the world is still full of wonders waiting for you to discover them." After the presentation, an elderly woman with neatly styled gray hair and a determined look approached her. "Mrs. Greenwood, your book changed my life. I sold the house I'd lived in for 40 years and bought a ticket to Japan. Next month, I'm flying there to study the art of calligraphy." Eleanor smiled and hugged the woman tightly. "This is just the beginning of your adventure," she said. "The best part of your life is waiting for you ahead." That evening, sitting on the porch of her home and looking at the stars, Eleanor took out the photograph of Robert taken on the beach in Nazaré. "You were right, my love," she whispered. "Our story didn't end. It just took a new turn." And in the silence of the summer evening, she thought she could hear his voice, quiet as the rustle of leaves. "I always knew you would find your way, Ellie. You were always stronger than you thought." Eleanor Greenwood, a 65-year-old writer and traveler, raised her eyes to the sky and smiled. Tomorrow she would begin planning a new journey, this time without a map, following only the call of her heart. After all, as she wrote in her book, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important than fear. And for her, that something had become the opportunity to live a life full of amazing discoveries, deep connections, and endless adventures. And somewhere high above her, among the stars, Robert smiled, knowing he had given her the most precious gift, not just a journey around the world, but a journey to herself.